Of all the places in the world to be making whiskey, Africa was not on my bingo card. Hey there, I'm Nath Martin, the Whiskey Scribe. Taste is subjective, whiskey is diverse, and this channel is about understanding it well enough to enjoy it on your own terms. Now in this series, I'm diving into every single country in the world that is making whiskey to a commercial level. So I've covered all of Europe, I've gone through Asia and Oceania, all of the Americas, that's North, Central, and South America, and now we've gone back across to Africa and the Middle East. And this is the part of the world that surprised me the most. There are more countries in Africa with up-and-coming whiskey industries than I first thought. Now throughout the video, I'm going to be having a map pop up here. This is not to scale, this is to show you approximately where in Africa the country is, and I'm going to be going through the list in a non-political alphabetical order, because this is not about politics, this is just about whiskey. First up is Cameroon, which was actually the hardest of the countries to really properly nail it down, but it does seem to have at least one locally made whiskey. It's called Wilson Whiskey, and it's made at the Firmencam distillery by Faux U Group, which makes beers and a wide range of spirits. Egypt entered the modern whiskey scene in 2004 with the release of Old Stag Smooth Blended Whiskey. The label does state that it's made under license from William MacLeod and Sons of Edinburgh, Scotland, but the product is distilled, aged, and bottled in Egypt. Now since then, you've also got Devlin Single Malt Whiskey, which was released in 2018, but other whiskey brands in Egypt tend to be a blend of locally produced spirit and imported Scotch. Ethiopia does have a small but growing whiskey industry. Now you find plenty of products that have been blended with imported Scotch and locally made spirits, but there is at least one locally made whiskey called Black Deer Whiskey. Israel has been making whiskey since 2013. Many would have heard of the Milk and Honey Distillery, which won the award for World's Best Single Malt in 2023, but there's also Golan Heights Distillery, Pelter Distillery, and Slingshot. The industry doesn't seem to have a preferred style, with single malts, grain whiskies, and even Kentucky-style corn whiskies all being produced. In 2019, Lebanon released its first whiskey with the enthusiast single malt, but since then Watani whiskey, a blend, has also been released. There's also Glenby, but this is a Scottish whiskey that's been matured in Lebanon. There is a Namibian whiskey, and it is very unique to the local environment. It's made by the Irongo Mountain Winery, and the whiskey is called Onjaba, which is the Ovombo word for elephant, for good reason. It's described as having a distinctive, slightly earthy tobacco-like aroma because it is made using African grains along with maize, wheat, rye, and malt, which are then smoked using burning elephant dung. The spirit is then aged in a combination of virgin oak, red wine barrels, brandy, and wine liqueur barrels. Now, I've had whiskies made with burning sheep dung, and they're actually quite good, so I'm really keen to try this one. Rwanda actually has a few whiskies, the first of which was 1000 Hills Whiskey, which was only released in 2019. Since then, you have the Advent Group producing Grandsire Whiskey, Swag Whiskey, Mambo, Cavort, and Golden Barrel Whiskey. We're finishing at the bottom in South Africa, which entered the whiskey market in 1977 with the release of 3 ships. But this product was made using a combination of Scottish whiskey and locally made spirit. So they couldn't put whiskey on the label, they had to call it unspecified spirit, which really instills confidence. They were able to release it as 3 Ships Whiskey in 1981 after it had been aged for 3 years, but this was still a blended product using imported Scotch. It was in 2003 that 3 Ships 10-year-old single malt was released as the first ever single malt fully distilled, matured, and bottled in South Africa using locally malted barley. In 2009, Bain's Cape Mountain Whiskey was released as the country's first 100% single grain whiskey. There is also Boplas Whiskey produced at the Calitzdorp Winery. While there aren't a lot of countries across Africa and the Middle East producing whiskey, still way more than I expected, whiskey is still a really popular drink in the region, with a lot of countries importing Scotch and blending it with their own locally made spirits, including Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Mauritius. And this is sometimes a precursor to releasing a completely locally produced spirit, so the region is worth keeping an eye on. But that completes this series on every country in the world that makes whiskey commercially. So I've covered all of Europe, Asia and Oceania, all of the Americas, North, Central, and South America, and now Africa and the Middle East. So if you didn't see those other videos, check them out, but otherwise, enjoy what's in your glass, no matter where in the world it's from, and slange.